Steve Irwin dedicated his entire life to shielding his daughter from harm, whether that meant dangerous animals, relentless media attention, or the crushing weight of public scrutiny. But 2 decades after his passing, something emerged that no father's love could have prevented, and it left both Terri and Robert visibly shattered on camera. What Bindi had been quietly carrying all along turned out to be the very thing Steve had whispered a warning about to Terri on the last night of his life. On a balmy Saturday night in early May 2026, the Bellagio Resort and Casino's Grand Ballroom became the setting for the 3rd annual Steve Irwin Gala. The organizers had gone to extraordinary lengths to bring a taste of the Australian wilderness to the Las Vegas Strip: khaki-draped tables, live ambassador animals mingling with guests, and comedian Rove McManus keeping the energy alive as the evening's host. The room overflowed with conservation supporters, celebrity well-wishers, and the extended Dancing with the Stars community that Robert had recently become a part of. Yet for the 2nd consecutive year, one seat at the Irwin family table remained conspicuously vacant. Bindi was absent, and her absence was felt the moment people began arriving. By the time Robert and Terri made their way down the carpet, the questions were already waiting. Terri addressed it first, her tone soft and carrying the fatigue of a long international journey. She explained to E! News that while Bindi's health was genuinely improving, traveling had become particularly difficult at this stage of her healing process. She expressed confidence that Bindi would join them the following year, but for the moment, home was where she needed to be. What followed became the most talked-about moment of the entire evening. With a tired but knowing smile, Terri remarked that Bindi actually found it easier to handle crocodiles at the zoo than to endure the journey to Nevada. That single offhand comment landed with far more force than most people in the room initially realized. To truly grasp why those words carried such weight, one has to understand what working with crocodiles at Australia Zoo actually demands. The Crocoseum is a 5,500-seat open-air stadium that Steve Irwin constructed with his own vision and determination, the same sacred space where the world gathered to say goodbye to him in 2006. When Terri suggested Bindi preferred working there to flying to Vegas, she was describing a woman who would sooner face a 4-meter saltwater crocodile before a packed crowd than sit on an airplane. Robert quickly stepped in to add some context. He noted that Australia Zoo operates with a workforce of roughly 500 people managing nearly 500,000 acres of conservation territory. While the family traveled overseas, someone needed to keep everything running, and Bindi was carrying that responsibility with remarkable dedication. He said it all with pride, but seasoned observers on the carpet sensed there was an unspoken layer to the story. The reality is that Bindi has been quietly waging an exhausting internal battle for well over a decade, one that most of the gala's attendees would never have suspected. Her progress is real, but it remains delicate, and the Irwin family has had to walk a careful line between publicly acknowledging her improvement and making sure nothing disrupts it. When Terri called travel challenging, it was not a throwaway line crafted for television. It was a condensed, carefully worded account of years of medical struggle that had quietly reshaped how this beloved family lives their lives. And it is that hidden history that gives this story its true depth. Bindi publicly revealed her endometriosis diagnosis in March 2023, posting a photograph from her hospital bed and describing over a decade of unanswered medical questions, inconclusive tests, and exhausting appointments. Her initial procedure, performed in New York by renowned specialist Dr. Tamer Sekin, resulted in the removal of 37 lesions along with a cyst that had actually fused her ovary to her abdominal wall. The disease, however, refused to retreat. Endometriosis is relentless by nature, and by spring 2025 it had returned with brutal force. On the very night of the 2nd annual Steve Irwin Gala, Bindi had intended to stand beside her family on that same Bellagio carpet. Instead, her plans collapsed within hours. Robert later shared with People magazine that she had pushed herself to attend despite significant pain, but her surgeon made clear that her appendix required immediate removal and that nothing else could come first. She was rushed from Las Vegas to New York for emergency surgery. Within an hour of waking up, she was already filming a message for her followers from her hospital bed, calmly explaining that her appendix was gone, 14 additional endometriosis lesions had been removed, and a hernia sustained during childbirth had been repaired. When the full picture came into focus across both surgeries combined, the numbers were staggering. 51 lesions total, 1 cyst, 1 appendix, and 1 postpartum hernia, all addressed in the span of a difficult and courageous medical journey. By August 2025, Bindi finally had something hopeful to share. She told her followers that she was able to move through ordinary days without being floored by nausea or blinding pain. In her own words, she was starting to feel like herself again. That hard-won recovery was precisely what Terri was safeguarding when she made the decision to keep Bindi home in 2026. And it was on that carpet, speaking about all of it, that the tears the family had been holding back began to surface. Once Terri had finished addressing Bindi's health, the mood on the carpet shifted toward something warmer. Reporters were eager to ask about a family joke that had been quietly gathering momentum for months. Specifically, a campaign Robert had apparently launched to convince his mother to sign up for Dancing with the Stars. Terri's response was perfectly calibrated. With practiced deadpan composure, she informed the reporter that she would carefully review the petition and respond within 5 to 7 business days. The carpet dissolved into laughter. Robert stood beside her looking like a man who had been rehearsing that exact exchange for weeks. He had previously told The Hollywood Reporter in December 2025 that he had personally launched the campaign and that his mother was putting up fierce resistance, but that he had no intention of backing down. He made the case methodically. Neither he nor Bindi had believed they could dance before stepping onto that floor, yet both had exceeded every expectation. Those instincts had to be inherited from somewhere. Since their father, for all his remarkable gifts, had not been blessed with natural rhythm, the logical conclusion was that Terri was the source of the family's dancing ability. The humor gradually gave way to something more genuine. Terri's voice grew quieter as she shared that she felt deeply touched just to be considered. She recalled Bindi once describing the experience of competing on the show as the nearest thing to flying she had ever known, a feeling of pure freedom unlike anything else in her life. Robert, recognizing the shift, looked directly into the cameras and made his promise. One way or another, his mother would be on that dance floor next season. What the carpet crowd did not know was that the petition had been born from a moment of raw, unscripted emotion that had unfolded months earlier in a Los Angeles ballroom. To understand where it all began, you have to go back to mid-October 2025 and week 5 of Dancing with the Stars' 34th season. The theme was Dedication Night, and every competitor was tasked with performing in honor of someone who had profoundly shaped them. Robert's choice was immediate and unequivocal. He was dancing for his mother. In the pre-performance segment, he could barely hold himself together. He described Terri as his greatest hero, pointing out that he had only been 2 years old when his father died. As the years passed and his understanding deepened, he had come to grasp just how extraordinary it was that she had managed to hold her family together, raise 2 children with strength and warmth, and simultaneously steward the conservation mission she and Steve had poured their lives into. At every moment he had longed for his father's presence, Terri had stepped into that space. His contemporary routine, set to a Phil Collins track from the Tarzan soundtrack, built toward a climax where Terri walked onto the ballroom floor wearing a yellow dress. Robert lifted her, spun her, and then held her as the final notes played, tears streaming freely. Several of the judges were visibly emotional. Bruno Tonioli told Robert that his father was watching from above with a proud smile. The performance earned 35 out of 40, but the moment that resonated most deeply came earlier, during rehearsal footage, when Terri herself broke down in front of the cameras. She confided that smiling had felt genuinely difficult in the years following Steve's death. She pushed back gently on Robert's framing. The idea that she had lifted him up felt backward to her, because the truth, as she saw it, was that her 2 children had been the only reason she had found the strength to face each new morning. And then came a dance that moved the entire family even more deeply. A few weeks later, the show marked its 20th anniversary with a special episode in which each couple performed a routine inspired by a legendary Mirrorball winning number. The assignment given to Robert and his professional partner Whitney Carson was uniquely poignant. They were to recreate Bindi's own freestyle from her season 21 championship in 2015, a foxtrot set to Leona Lewis's Footprints in the Sand, a song Bindi had chosen specifically as a tribute to her late father. The emotional weight of that task was almost impossible to put into words. When the performance aired, Bindi walked onto the floor at the end to embrace her brother and Whitney. As the three of them stood together holding hands, images of a young Steve Irwin cradling an infant Robert were projected across the ballroom floor beneath their feet. Robert sank to his knees, overwhelmed beyond the ability to stand. The judges awarded the season's first perfect score, a flawless 40 out of 40. Bruno Tonioli described the performance as both poetic and deeply moving, and referenced the royal seal of approval, nodding to a personal video message that Prince William had recorded for Robert that same evening. Derek Hough, fighting back emotion at the judges' table, described Robert as the defining joyful presence of his generation. Tom Bergeron, who had hosted the show during Bindi's triumphant run a decade prior, told Robert he had grown into something genuinely extraordinary. In his private confessional afterward, Robert revealed that the appearance of his father's image on the floor had been a complete surprise to him. He spoke about carrying his father's spirit into every single performance. That night set the tone for what became one of the most watched finales the show had produced in years, and before reaching it, Robert's body would be pushed to its absolute limit. By the time the late November finale arrived, Robert was operating on sheer willpower. Whitney later admitted they had nearly broken under the weight of 11 weeks of grueling rehearsals. Robert had been managing a serious rib injury throughout, making even breathing a source of pain. Whitney made the difficult but necessary call to remove one of their more physically demanding lifts from the freestyle routine to protect them both. The finale consisted of 3 distinct rounds. They began with a quickstep to a track by Australian rock band Jet, followed by a flawless instant cha-cha that earned a perfect 30 from the judges, and finished with a freestyle performance weaving together Sam Sparrow's Black and Gold and Avicii's The Nights. When hosts Alfonso Ribeiro and Julianne Hough finally called his name, Robert took the microphone and credited his sister immediately, echoing her earlier promise that the show would transform his life, and confirming she had been completely right. The audience numbers told their own story. Over 9 million viewers tuned in, making it the most watched entertainment program since the Academy Awards that year. The voting total reached 72 million, double the previous season's figures. Robert became the youngest male champion in the show's history. He and Bindi made history together as the first brother-sister pair ever to each win a Mirrorball trophy. In the audience that night were Terri, Bindi's husband Chandler Powell, and their 4-year-old daughter Grace Warrior. The Instagram post Terri published that night has taken on an almost sacred quality among the family's devoted following. She celebrated Robert's warmth and dedication, welcomed Whitney officially into the Irwin family, and noted with gentle humor that even those who spend their days with crocodiles can find their rhythm on a dance floor. 4 months on, standing in the Bellagio's gilded ballroom, every ounce of that pride came flooding back. At the Vegas Gala, Access Hollywood reporters posed the question the Irwin family has been asked in one form or another for 20 years. What would Steve Irwin say if he could witness everything his family had become? Terri answered with her characteristic blend of warmth and dry wit. She suggested Steve would have been genuinely baffled to find himself the subject of a Las Vegas gala. She made the point that the city's reputation for excess tends to overshadow its very real capacity for generosity, and that the philanthropic work flowing out of events like this one reaches far beyond the Strip. Robert's answer was the one that spread across every entertainment platform within hours. He reflected on how rarely a day passes without a stranger approaching him to share how his father had changed their outlook or inspired their life choices. That his father's influence was somehow growing stronger 2 decades after his death revealed 2 things simultaneously: the magnitude of the man Steve Irwin had been, and the incredible tenacity of the woman who had kept his mission alive. He turned toward his mother as he said it. Terri provided the moment's punctuation with characteristic timing. She told reporters that the one advantage Robert had over his father was a genuine willingness to remove his shirt in the service of wildlife education. The crowd laughed, but beneath the laughter ran something heavier. Terri acknowledged that the journey from 2006 to that ballroom had demanded enormous reserves of endurance and had carried its share of profound sorrow, but also moments of joy she would not trade for anything. And in just a few months, the family would face the hardest calendar date of all over again. 4 months after the Las Vegas Gala, the Irwin family will quietly mark 2 decades since Steve was taken from them, killed by a stingray at Bat Reef on September 4, 2006. Everyone in the conservation community is aware of what that date represents. The family carries it with them every single day. Robert had spoken about his grief with unusual openness earlier in 2026, during a conversation with Anderson Cooper on CNN. He described feeling his father's presence most powerfully during remote crocodile research expeditions, when an unexpected warmth settles over him in the wilderness. He was candid about how differently he and Bindi experience loss. Bindi had years of real memories with their father, which makes her grief sharp and immediate, while his own, having lost Steve so young, feels more like a persistent, all-encompassing weight. He shared a remarkable story from his first solo crocodile expedition, when he captured a large saltwater crocodile only to find that his father had tagged the very same animal years before. He took it as a message. Closing out his time on the gala carpet, Robert returned to the theme he had been sounding consistently since winning the Mirrorball, that carrying forward his father's passion, optimism, and commitment to conservation was both a personal privilege and a responsibility that extended to future generations. With Terri at his side, Bindi healing at home, and young Grace Warrior growing up wrapped in the family's khaki tradition, the voice of the crocodile hunter continues to resound through the Crocoseum each and every day. What did you take away from the family's words about Bindi's recovery? And do you think Terri will finally step onto the Dancing with the Stars floor next season? Share your thoughts in the comments below.